All right, we're starting with the U.S. Constitutional Convention, and we left off after break, or right before break, with the Articles of Confederation, which was the United States' first form of government. And we realized quickly on that the Articles of Confederation is not a good form of government. There's a lot of holes, and the national government is left basically powerless, which causes a lot of problems throughout the states. And so they decide to have a meeting. Once they have this meeting, they meet in Philadelphia in May of 1787. And the initial idea is we're just going to change some things to the Articles of Confederation. They realize quickly on that they don't just need to change things. They need to revamp. They need to redo, start from scratch. And so delegates are sent, and they meet in Philadelphia, which initially will be one of the first capitals of the United States, because Washington, D.C. does not become a capital um, until a little bit later on. George Washington actually never lives in Washington, D.C. So who are some of the key players? First of all, we have James Madison, Little Jimmy. He is considered the father of the U.S. Constitution because he helped design the Virginia Plan, which makes up the majority of the U.S. Constitution of how it's organized. So he is young, but he comes prepared. He has ideas of how he wants the government to run, and we'll look at the Virginia Plan in a moment. The other person that you think of probably is George Washington. He is the president of the convention. No, he's not the president of the United States yet. He's just running the meetings, keeping votes, making sure the meetings run smoothly. All right, so what does the Virginia Plan say? This is what James Madison came up with. He had some other people helping him too, but he had the main ideas here. So he comes up with three separate branches that we will have an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. The executive branch enforces the laws, the legislative branch makes the laws, and the judicial branch helps interpret the laws. The legislative branch will be the ones who elect the chief executive, the president. This is exactly the same thing as was under the Articles of Confederation. The judicial branch is chosen by the legislative branch as well. And when we say legislative branch, a lot of times we actually mean Congress, since these are the lawmakers. And that's similar to what it is today, because a lot of our judicial branch has to be, they're often nominated by the president and approved by Congress, the legislative branch. So the legislative branch is supposed to be bicameral. Representation for each state is based on A, how big your state is, how many people live in your state, or B, how much money your state contributes. So you could be Rhode Island, very small, but contribute millions and millions of dollars every year and have more representation. So you're going to have two houses. Like I said, it's bicameral. The lower house is going to be chosen by popular vote, and the Senate will be chosen by the lower house, the House of Representatives. That's actually how it was to start off with our U.S. Constitution. However, today we directly elect our House of Representatives and our senators. And the other difference is we don't care how much money a state contributes. You don't get anything for doing that. The New Jersey plan benefits smaller states, whereas the Virginia plan was supposed to be more beneficial to the bigger states. The New Jersey plan benefits the smaller ones. Congress is supposed to be unicameral, so just one Congress, one House, all grouped together. All the states are equally represented, so whether you're Delaware or Rhode Island, you'll have the same representation as a state like New York or Virginia. So, of course, you could see the big states probably won't like that. The executive branch would have more than one president, of course, still chosen by Congress, because we can't rely on the common people to do that. And number 4 is that judiciary branch, you'll have one Supreme Court that is appointed by the executive branch, which is kind of what we do today. Like President Obama can nominate Supreme Court justices, and they must be approved by Congress. So what do they really come up with? Well, they come up with the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise, one and the same. So you do have the three branches of government, executive, legislative, judicial, and you have the two houses, just like the Virginia plan wanted. The difference is that you will have 2 senators per state. So that makes the smaller states happy. But in the lower house, the House of Representatives, the number of representatives per state is based on a state's population. So if you're a bigger state, have more people living there, you'll have more representation in the House of Representatives. How do we deal with the issue of slavery? Well, there's 2 things. The next 2 things we're going to talk about, the Three-Fifths Compromise and the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise. Well, there are a lot of slaves living in the South, and the Southerners obviously want those slaves to be counted as part of their population. Not counted for anything else, not counted for tax purposes, but just for population. That way, Southerners could have more representation in Congress. So they come up with what they call the Three-Fifths Compromise, which means every 5 slaves will count only 3 of those for your population. So it allows the Southerners to feel as if they are being more fairly represented, and it allows the Northerners to feel as if they haven't given everything away. So the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise. This is how our founding fathers dealt with the issue of slavery. Not very well, obviously, because we have the Three-Fifths Compromise, which is no longer in existence today. Nobody counts as three-fifths of a person. But the other thing we do is Congress cannot tax exports. So if Virginia is shipping goods to England, the national government cannot tax those goods coming from Virginia. But they can tax the slave trade. So if you buy or sell slaves, you will be taxed for it, just like if you're buying any other product that you would be taxed for today. But the big thing they decide to do is nothing. They say you cannot touch the slave trade for 20 years. So it was such a hot button issue that they could not decide what to do about slavery. They just decided, we'll talk about it again in 20 years. So definitely put a Band-Aid on it. How is the U.S. Constitution eventually ratified? Well, unlike the Articles of Confederation, where you had to get 100% of the state's approval in order to pass something, the delegates were smart enough to realize, let's just go 9 out of 13. So 9 out of 13 states had to approve it. You then had the two groups split up. You had two factions in Constitution. You had the Federalists, who were pro-Constitution. They liked the fact that power was divided between the state and national government. And you have the Anti-Federalists, who did not like the fact that the national government had this power. They wanted more of a guarantee of rights, such as the Bill of Rights, and they wanted more God in it. And these are people who weren't necessarily 100% behind the U.S. Constitution. So you have these two groups that are kind of targeting each other or fighting against each other of whether the U.S. Constitution will be passed. How was the Constitution eventually ratified? Well, the Federalists just moved faster. Point blank, they had more money and they moved faster. And they were able to have special voting conventions. They had people like Thomas Paine and philosophers and writers at the time write the Federalist Papers, which would encourage and convince people that the Constitution was a good thing and that you should go out and vote for it. You have people in Massachusetts who tell John Hancock, who does not like the Constitution, he's an anti-federalist, that if he supported the U.S. Constitution, he would be able to become president. He supports the Constitution, thinking he's going to become president, but of course, hopefully you know that John Hancock was never a president. So in essence, they lied to him. They had the special voting conventions before the Anti-Federalists could really rally enough support or get organized. And so once the Federalists had their special voting conventions, they voted to see if the U.S. Constitution would pass. It passed, and the Anti-Federalists were kind of left with their hands in their pockets, not able to do a whole lot. In the end, Delaware is going to be the first state to ratify it. That's why the license plate says the first state, and New Hampshire will be the ninth. The other states will eventually ratify the U.S. Constitution, but once again, keep in mind, we only needed 9 out of 13 to do that. Here are some powers of the national government. You will notice that they are very similar to the Articles of Confederation, with the exception of number 1 and 2. The national government can now levy and collect taxes. That means they can collect taxes to pay for an army or to go fight wars. And before that, they couldn't collect taxes to pay for anything. So number 1 is incredibly important, no matter how much people complain about taxes. And number 2, they regulate trade between states and countries. This allows states to stop bickering between one another. So we will go into the next section about what are the powers of the executive, legislative, and judicial branch, and what are the qualifications you must meet. June 1788, U.S. Constitution is fully ratified.